Well, let's go ahead and get started. Today, welcome to the World of EUC Insights webinar. We are going to talk about the cloud. Journey to the cloud, cloud exit, also, hybrid multi-cloud as well. We all here bring different experiences from, our backgrounds, what we do daily and working with customers and so forth. So today, Patrick will join us shortly. He's having some internet connectivity issues, but on the webinar today, my name is Jarian Gibson. I'm part of the World of EUC board. I'm also a Nutanix employee and a Citrix technology professional. Been in the EUC space for a number of years now. I'll go ahead and let Benjamin introduce himself.
Good afternoon, Benjamin Crill. I'm with Choice Solutions as a solutions architect and Nutanix practice lead. I've been doing everything EUC for the entirety of my 20-year IT career. So thank you, everybody, for joining today.
And Mark, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself today, please?
Sure. Mark Fermin. I am working at Ingram Micro, where I'm a senior technical enablement engineer. I've been in the UC space for many moons now, probably since about 2007. It's about half of my career. Spent some time at Citrix and at several Citrix and VMware partners. Excited to be here and looking forward to some good conversation.
And it looks like Patrick has joined us, so I'm going to pass the ball to Patrick because he is our host today.
How are y'all? Hopefully y'all can hear me. It looks like that part's working. I'm
Yep.
waiting for the webcamopotamus to settle down, So, all right, cool. Let's click over here. Yep. And so I'm Patrick Coble. I'm the one of the other board members with Jarian and do nerdy things, and so we're going to talk about some nerdy VDI and the cloudy kind of things, which is going to be really fun. So let's rock and roll here.
All right. So you want to go ahead and take this slide, Patrick?
Yep. So first off, thanks for everybody coming, and then the second thank you definitely has to be to our founding partners. These are the people that make this happen and are going to let a lot of great things happen. And so we've got to thank, iGel, Kalaya, Liquidware, Nerdio, NextThink, Nutanix, and Tenzig, and then our channel sponsors, which is Choice Solutions, for stepping up and helping support this organization and the things we're going to be doing in the next couple months, beyond just webinars, when we start firing up local groups and doing our dance like we used to at lots of cities around the world just from last year. So we're going to get the band back together. So that's going to be fun. So let's go here. Yep. And the main thing here is we got to know that there is swag, and so make sure you stay at the end. And obviously, if you've looked at the World of EUC and if you've joined, you've gotten the emails or in the Slack channel, you know that you can order this stuff too if you want some, so that you can be decked out and be a super cool nerd with World of EUC stuff. So definitely click at that. So don't leave early so that you can stay at the end and have a chance to win this. So you can get your swag pack with a sweet shirt, a coffee cup, and a koozie. So that way, if you need cold beverages or hot beverages and a shirt, you're going to be a very happy camper. All right. We've heard that the cloud is good. So let's talk about how awesome the cloud is, right?
So Benjamin, do you want to go first? We're kind of do a roundtable. So today's more of a discussion, not a lot of slides today. Feel free to chime in and use the chat or the Q&A. We also have a panel at the end as well. But we're going to start with the good. So we'll go with Mr. Crill first.
Sure. So the good part about what I've seen with customers being able to leverage it is being able to do something quickly on a trial and error basis before they ultimately have that long-term commitment to something. So one experiment that I'm working through now with a customer is what does advanced graphics look like, and trying to get hardware into the data center for a trial basis is going to be difficult. So we're leveraging public cloud to say, all right, let's put that workload out there and give it a shot, have our end users get their hands onto it, figure that, what the workflow is going to be, how does it change what they're doing. And then at that point in time, once we've proved out the concept, then we can determine, does this stay in the public cloud? Is this something that becomes a hybrid solution, or where does it fit? But having those kind of, hey, I need to get this up and going really quick before I make that long-term investment. It's really awesome for things like that. Outside of, we talk about cloud bursting and overrunning, but really just kind of seeing is this even something that's going to be a solution that's going to be go forward for the business is really where I've seen a lot of gains, and then filling in gaps where hardware vendors can't keep up with where the business is needing. This is tempered down a little bit, but I mean, last year we were still in the huge throes of supply chain issues and things like that. I had a customer that had a project that was delayed 6 months because they couldn't get the uplink part for their Cisco switches, and it was a 6-month backlog on it. So they had to keep things moving forward. So we shifted things to the public cloud while we waited for a vendor to get us a part. So areas like that where you can supplement and leverage somebody else who has already made that investment until your investment's a really good positive use for cloud computing.
Mark, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and just to kind of echo what Benjamin said, there's, I think we've seen a lot of that enhanced flexibility and agility as well. Being at Ingram Micro, this business is started out as primarily hardware distribution, right? So that's been a core staple of what Ingram Micro has done for a long time and continues to be. But we certainly noticed that, as Ben said, as COVID came through and people started to go home, and have to work remotely as kind of a the de facto experience. There was a huge stress on the laptop supply chain, the thin client supply chain, pretty much anything, especially as far as end user compute went. That is starting to, as Ben mentioned, come back. But a lot of that gap that was filled by, hey, we can, use things like, cloud desktops or something like that to be able to fill that gap temporarily. And a lot of that is kind of in and of itself made itself a proof of concept during that time as well. So we started to see, customers and partners that were, testing those things out, kind of was a proof of concept that was in production during the pandemic. And then, a lot of that was just transited into full-time production for use cases like, contractors, for temporary works, for projects, things like that. It's really helped, I think, also with the adoption of some of the more advanced, features and capabilities like advanced analytics. AI integration is a huge one, right? Those features are very difficult to get and develop in-house a lot of times. So being able to, put test dev environments out in the cloud and build around that in that platform where it's managed by, an AI as a service provider or analytics as a service, being able to kind of build around those things in situ and then, then modify them to your needs is something that we've definitely seen has been there as well. And I think, and this is an arguable point, but one of the last things I think we've seen in some cases, in certain use cases, I think there were some cost efficiencies for certain things that could be had by moving to cloud. It took a lot of good advanced planning, a lot of good, intelligent planning, scaling, and then management. But there's cost savings that everybody said were mythical at the beginning. They can be achieved, and we have seen many customers start to achieve those, in true cloud, pay-as-you-go fashion lately. So.
Yeah, and then for me, I by far seen the biggest use case be disaster recovery. A lot of people are getting out of owning that secondary data center for disaster recovery. A lot of customers, they usually run passive in those. Some customers, while they do run active, so they know it's always up to date and they split the load and that kind of stuff. I'm still seeing a lot of the customers who have passive secondary data centers collapse those and start using the cloud for that piece. That was the biggest one that I started seeing. Going from there, the second one was bursting, right? So just like Mark and Benjamin have said, is that, especially coming out of the pandemic or supply chain issues or that kind of stuff, where some kind of event happens where you have an influx of users that have to not be in the office and suddenly are remote from home, and you may not have the connectivity back to your data center from their devices or them going home to be able to quickly come in with that. So you might provide some kind of remote application or desktop solution for them. Think about things like a weather event. We just came out of the pandemic, any kind of natural disaster, that kind of thing, where even a power outage, even, that kind of stuff, where we have problems with the building. So they're using that, especially when they can't get that equipment in their hands very quickly. But also, too, when they look at collapsing, data centers or using it for bursting, they're looking at, how much more power and cooling can I save? The infrastructure cost, the maintenance cost, the administrative overhead, and so forth. Those are by far the two biggest things. The other thing too is I've seen is with success for the cloud is proper planning, right? Getting in right away and understanding what you need to do in the cloud, where you need to be, what kind of workloads, what your costs are, all those different things when you're moving from, whether it's a partial time, a full time, or even a data center takeout type scenario where you want to get into the cloud, is making sure that you cross all your T's and dot all your I's. So those are the good things. So there's a lot of good success that I've seen in the cloud, but it all starts with making sure you're planning there and the due diligence there. Another use case I'm starting to see is now looking at data center takeout completely, right? Customers don't want to own data centers anymore. And if they can move a big chunk of their users, they're looking at moving those users to the cloud to, again, not having to manage data centers. So not just their secondary or disaster recovery data center, but their main production one as well. Now, they don't always go 100% to the cloud with that. I do think hybrid cloud is the best use case here. And in some cases, hybrid multi-cloud is the best use case here. But when you're looking at those that are doing data center takeout, it's not usually 100%. It's usually, a big chunk of the data center. We still have, some applications or some backend infrastructure that we can't move to the cloud. So typically that stays on-prem. But, that data center takeout is starting to become more of a scenario. And I've seen with a couple of customer projects where they don't want to manage data center anymore. They just want to manage the workload. So that's the good there that I've seen from the cloud. It's a great tool. With cloud, it's another tool in the toolbox. You think about those scenarios I talked about. But before you go all in, dip your toe in the water. You got to go that crawl, walk, run. Make sure you can swim, or otherwise you might run into some issues. And before we move on, does Mark or Benjamin have anything else to say about the good side of the cloud?
The one other thing I'll add is, and Mark alluded to it, as far as leveraging it for things that are costly or cumbersome to produce in-house, is a lot of the platform as a service offerings are really where the expense for on-prem data centers for like high availability and complex configurations around like SQL clusters, database clusters, things like that. If you can move to the cloud and provide your applications that additional uptime with some of those back-end services that maybe you don't have the expertise or the budget to do, and you can leverage that from the cloud, that's where you can really add the value of being able to take your workloads and what your end users needs and give that higher level of service without having to have this massive capital or ongoing operational expense of what it would take to build that in-house. You can leverage what AWS, Azure, Google, what they've already done, and they provide to you as a service, and then just build on top of that. I think that really, where I see customers is where they can fit that and where their applications can work with that. That really becomes a sweet spot as far as being able to get to that cost benefit for moving things to the public cloud.
Mark?
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely concur. And I think, just as you mentioned, Jarian, one of the things that I think we see most often is that kind of BC and DR use case. That's definitely one that's growing, and I think it's just going to become more salient, and more kind of ubiquitous as time moves on.
Yeah, one thing I want to add too is that it's just not the hyperscalers too that you can consider cloud. I know a lot of times where we talk the cloud, everyone thinks the hyperscalers, Microsoft, Azure, GCP, but also too there are the service providers out there and the managed service providers as well. You can consider cloud also. Think about the use cases where you might need certain configuration of hardware resources or GPUs that you can't get in the hyperscalers. That's where those service providers and those managed service providers come in pretty handy there, because they can get more custom with you as well. And the other thing too is the whole Microsoft licensing thing, is where, depending on what your workload is, what you're doing, AWS and GCP might not be the best option for you. And now I know that Microsoft has that agreement now with Amazon, or I'm sorry, AWS and Workplace's Core type of scenario. But your best flexibility for when it comes to licensing is going to be Microsoft. Your second best, most likely, is going to be one of those service providers or those managed service providers as well. So as you're looking at the cloud, don't just think about the hyperscalers. Think about those service providers out there as well to help you, because you have that flexibility not only with the licensing side, but the hardware side as well. Mr. Patrick, anything from you before we go to the next slide?
No, I think the big thing that I've seen is kind of that M&A thing also is the reason a lot of people go there, because it's easy to stand up a lot of infrastructure quickly when you're onboarding a new part of your organization, and then also be able to keep them separated. And another thing that I saw go into cloud was people that needed GPUs. Yep. Because getting them physically was taking so long. It was just a much simpler process to rent it per month. And I think it goes back to what I think all three of you have echoed, is kind of the crawl, walk, run, is don't just run there. And because there is really good things that are possible. And, GPUs is one of those, because you can get going now. You don't have to wait for this to come and that license and this doodad and that thingamabob. So it's good stuff. So let's go. The not so good. I see an exit. I like these AI pictures.
So, Mark, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. So, it's been interesting, Ingram Micro, as we're kind of making this transition to a kind of a platform company and a services company ourselves, we've seen things even internally here. And this has been, kind of reflective of what we've seen with our partners and end customers. We've seen a bunch of things that went in early, and then we see the whole repatriation game happening now, right? So things that kind of, we thought it was going to be great. We thought we did all the right planning, asked the right questions, but turns out that we didn't know what we didn't know. So certain things, whether it was for security and compliance, whether it was for technical or operational complexity, user experience or application performance, or the biggest one that we see, right, is the cloud spend. That the numbers just did not add up. So now we've got to repatriate and bring those those applications, bring those workloads back into the data center, and kind of either start from square one again, or rethink how we do that. And I think some of those things have been some of the biggest challenges we've seen, that we're trying to help partners and trying to help their end customers through, especially from the distribution perspective.
Benjamin?
Yeah, it's, to me, a lot of what Mark said rings true. Where I've seen probably the biggest problems is where customers and organizations treat it just like it's another data center move. And they're just like, hey, I just want to put everything into the cloud. And then they put it out there and they say, all right, sweet, we're done. And then they get that cloud bill and they're like, wait, why aren't we doing this? And the lack of understanding of cloud as an operational model, not as a hosting model. And the follow on, like if you want to do the lift and shift just to get it out there first and maybe get rid of your data center, that's one thing, but it needs to have that follow on with, all right, now how do we best leverage the services that are out there, not just put it into somebody else's data center, and then realizing that the cost is probably going to be a lot more if we don't do anything different. So understanding, and like what you said, Jarian, too, like it's not just putting something into the hyperscaler, it's looking at cloud services. Might something that the cloud that the hyperscaler is providing, might there be something that works better but maybe comes from what would be considered a non-traditional cloud provider? But really kind of looking at everything and seeing what fits best where. I mean, most data centers for enterprises these days have evolved from 20, 30 plus years, and then they want to just move it all in 1 year, and it just doesn't work out well. So having that plan and picking off the right workloads and moving it out there and learning from something small and then growing it as you get more experience with it is probably not doing that is where I've seen the most challenges, is that they get out over their skis and then they got to make some really tough decisions as to where do we go next.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that too as well. So a lot of times I see where, time to value can be a great asset in the cloud. But I've seen customers as well where they've spent months or even a year longer trying to get there. And for some reason they've overspent their budget, they haven't deployed much, and that's where that exit comes back, where they come back on prem, and they start looking at, how can we do this better? What other tools can we use? So in the rollout in Nutanix, I see a lot of that. And then, we start looking at it, by a use case basis. I know that everyone's got some kind of cloud initiative. But when you say, we have to get to the cloud without any plan, that's where I see things get peeled back to on-prem, or they start going into a hybrid model. I think I mentioned before about there's always some kind of backend application or something they may not be able to move. So that's where the hybrid comes in. But, if you don't do that due diligence, and take that time to properly plan, look at certain workloads that you can use, make sure that your data and application gravity is there, especially from my EUC perspective, because if I give you a VM in the cloud, but my application backend and my data is still on-prem, and that's, connection, whether it's VPN or Express Route or Direct Connect, if there's any kind of latency in there that can be that's injected that causes that problem with the application or the data, that's going to cause my end users a bad user experience. And I don't know about you guys, but depending on the vertical, that could be lots of money. That could be all kinds of issues happen, if that user experience is good. So, the biggest thing there is don't just look at moving the workloads, where some people say, yeah, I got to get out there, but also that data and application gravity is important as well, because otherwise you're just giving them a shell of a VM. So you have to have that strategy. And that's where I see a lot of customers that, whether it's over budget, like you said, Benjamin, get over your skis, over budget, taking too long, not planned accordingly, or not planned with certain workloads or use cases or application data backends in mind, is where you start seeing people get a bad taste of cloud in their mouth. And that's what they peel back and have to kind of rethink their plan going forward. So, it always comes down, to requirements and what tools you need to deliver. But that's what I'm seeing. I'm not trying to bag on the cloud here. I think cloud's a great resource, but like I said before, it's one of the tools in the toolbox to use to provide a solution. Any other thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, one of the things I was kind of thinking about this was some of the biggest, and I wouldn't necessarily call them failures, but learning experiences that a lot of customers and organizations had from cloud 2 was not having that governance model that's kind of cloud ready or cloud aware in place before you get there, so everything is responsive then once you get out there. And that's where we've seen CISOs get fired, CISOs get prosecuted and things like that, because that governance model wasn't there from the get-go. So from a security perspective, some of the early, I think, explorations and early forays into the cloud for a lot of customers really didn't have that. It's very hard to bolt on after the fact. It's hard and it's expensive. So I think that's one of the things that I've also seen, kind of along this makes it harder, just perspective.
Yeah, and coupled on top of that, some of the non-technical stuff. So where I've seen a couple customers really get into problems is they make a commitment to Azure or AWS, and once that CFO is signed off on it, they want to make sure, like, get everything out there as fast as possible. So the technical folks are doing what they're being told, get it out there as fast as possible. But what you said, Mark, is you get it out there and you're focused on, I just need to check this box to get this person off my back and close this ticket. And you're not thinking about long-term, is anybody going to know that this is out there? And is anybody checking that this is properly secured and is being managed the way it needs to be? And they're not. They're just trying to make sure, hey, we're spending $25,000 a day to AWS to get all this stuff out there. Make sure we're getting the value out of our $25,000 a day.
The other thing to add that too is, if I have to get back out, what does that look like? What's that going to cost me? So as planning on how I'm gonna get there, what happens if I need to change directions, right? If I need to go to a different cloud vendor, or if some of that stuff needs to be pulled back on prem, what does that look like from a cost perspective and a operational perspective of pulling some of that stuff back out to on-prem or to another cloud vendor? Am I locked in to this cloud? Can any software licenses I have, are they portable? Those type of things too. So don't always think about just how do I get there. What's my plan after I get there? Like Benjamin and Mark have said, whether it's doing lift and shift and then changing back from or then looking at native cloud services and evolving those workloads, or is my plan to stay always in this one cloud, or I have a multi-cloud strategy, or what happens if I need to move clouds or back out? So those are things too as well. And I've seen customers have some issues with that, to where that even adds more additional cost and pain if they have to be either moved back or moved to another cloud. Looks like Patrick's back with us. Any thoughts, Patrick, before we move to the next slide?
Yeah, I think y'all echoed on it a little bit, especially on Mark's side, but the security part is probably the biggest thing I do as a security nerd. And the easiest way I like to explain it to other CISOs when we talk about people getting fired and prosecuted and all that is by default, all the clouds, when you next, it's on the internet, right? So like you actually have to uncheck things to not put it on the internet. Whereas if you were doing it old school in your data center, that wasn't by default, right? You had to actually make major configuration changes to make that possible, to NAT and put the right ports open and all that. It makes it too easy. And the next thing is just privilege access and controlling the control plane is a full-time job in the cloud. It's not just like add someone to the vCenter admin group, the Hyper-V admin group, the XenCenter admin group, the AHV admin group, and then you're good. Because there's so many roles, there's so many layers, there's global administrators, there's root if you're in AWS. So it can be so complicated. And so like Mark was saying, like you've got to kind of have your governance plan kind of figured out before you go. Because once you go there, there's no more collect $200. You're on your own. And so that I think is the biggest bad thing that I see the most often. All right. So let's go. All right. So considerations for the cloud. So what do we need to be mindful of? What do we need to think about? The one thing is, I think we almost have said all those things by talking about the good and the not so good. So what do we want to go to? Jarian, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here, and just working with customers, whether they're going to AWS or Azure, and working with our cloud clusters product from Nutanix, is your landing zone. I think the biggest part is your landing zone, whether it's AWS or Azure. Figuring out, how you're going to configure your VPCs, how you're going to configure your VNets. What does your networking look like? What does that security look like for those? What does that connectivity look like to whether if I'm going back to on-prem, or if I'm in a multi-cloud solution and having that connectivity to clouds? Usually that's the biggest blocks in my opinion to get done. Once you have that landing zone, and that's whether you're using our product or just going cloud native, is understanding that landing zone or landing zones where those workloads are going to be. I think once you have that piece figured out, then things become a lot easier. But if you do not deploy without having that in mind, that's where the deployments can be stalled. They can take a lot of time. You have to go back and redo something. So I know landing zone setup can be one of the biggest stumbling blocks that I've seen in my experience.
Yeah, I'll tag on to that. I mean, it's getting the foundational stuff done first and not rushing that. And then, I mean, we've said it multiple times, crawl, walk, run is take off a bite-sized use case and start with that and figure out the things that are going to have to change in your environment, not necessarily just from a technical perspective, but from the operational perspective. So before you, as the vSphere guy or the AHV guy, you may have been able to do everything soup to nuts, but now you might have to interact with your networking guy some more. You're going to have to interact with your security guy to make sure that it's not out onto the internet, or if it is, that it's secured down properly. But some of the provisioning processes are going to have to change by nature of you not having full control of everything, or your controls being different than what they are now. So take something small and learn the things that you don't know yet, and document that, so that when you start doing these larger, more complex workloads that go out there, then that foundational stuff you have done first.
Yeah, and I can kind of build on that as well, by just, in not even just taking bite-sized chunks, but, go back and review, kind of understand once it's there. And Benjamin, I think you said this, well too. Understand, how does this look now that it's there from an operational perspective, from a compliance perspective? Once we're out there, who do we need to look at for support? I think someone mentioned in the chat, I saw that, support is always very interesting in the cloud. Who's responsible for what once it's there? And if that stuff's not looked at ahead of time, and you get to a Sev1 outage scenario or something, and nobody knows who to, you get on those. We've all been on the 24-hour, 48-hour bridge calls where everybody's doing this and pointing fingers at each other, because no one really understands who supports what aspect of these things. So that's kind of a big piece that we often see missed, as well as, people are in such a rush to get out there that they get these things out there, and then that was kind of the supportability aspect was the last thing that they thought of. And I've seen even organizations that have put things out there and then, or even gone, cloud native, cloud first, without that kind of not only the operational and support capacity built in, but just the continuous audit and the continuous kind of what are we doing? Are we doing this right? From a not only just a security perspective, but an operational perspective, a financial perspective. Does this still make sense? There's nothing to say that you can't come back, and that's exactly what we've seen, right? But so many people, get, I don't know if it's personally or just kind of you get these things out there and you feel like you have to be there, and it's almost like a failure to repatriate it. But in reality, that's what we should be aspiring to, I think, in a lot of cases, right? You don't have to kind of pigeonhole where something is going to live full times. Application use cases, workloads, their requirements change. Their actual structure changes. So as those things evolve and change over time, I think having that kind of open mindset for these don't have to live in the cloud. They could be a hybrid model. They could be a multi-cloud model. They could be everything. Just don't pigeonhole that thinking by thinking it has to be this place, that place, or that place. And I've seen some organizations do that. It kind of it's kind of like an aha moment where they're like, oh yeah, well, it really isn't that bad. It's not a bad thing if we have to bring it back.
Yeah, and I agree there as well. It's like I truly do think that it's not one cloud or on-prem or the other. It's truly a hybrid multi-cloud scenario. And then going from there, it's like, can we get by with just native cloud tools, or I'm sorry, cloud tools native to that hyperscaler, or do I need to bring in third-party tools? I see Tarkin's on here from Nerdio, and that's a great tool to add on to something like AVD. I know a lot of times when customers look at going to a hybrid multi-cloud scenario, they bring Nutanix in and look at our Nutanix Cloud Clusters product. So, it's not just saying that I can go to Azure and be fine with everything in Azure. Do I need other things to be successful in that deployment? And also too, if I have to move, how easy can I move? How easy can I stretch back and forth even, and those type of things. And the biggest thing too is performance, right? We have all these options out there, whether it's, a ephemeral disk or different levels of disk tiering, what kind of t-shirt size of the virtual machine, how much RAM, that kind of stuff too, making sure that, I have the right resources for my workloads to make sure it doesn't become an easy or it doesn't become a user experience issue. And thank you, Tarkin, in the chat as well. He makes like a comment here. The EUC ecosystem provides a good joint value to simplify common shortcomings, and that is the exact point right there. And that's a great comment there, Tarkin. So thank you. So yeah, it's always looking at what's in the ecosystem, how can those tools help you, and what things can you use to make sure you're more successful, not just the initial deployment, but ongoing as well. And monitoring is a big one too. It's like, how can I monitor these things, especially if I'm in a multi-cloud solution? All those things come to play, and there's a lot of good partners out there that can help you with that.
It looks like we got one question from Wendy that's kind of based on that. So, what are some of the most common services and infrastructure that gets repatriated back that has had to come back on site? So, I know
Before we
Mark.
answer that, are we all good with the considerations? We want to go to the panel because that can be part of the panel discussion.
Oh, yeah. I guess
Yeah.
so. We can make that our panel one.
Yep. Let's go ahead and move over to the panel discussion then.
Let's get paneling. All right. Well, there we go. And now we're at the panel. So I'll say it again. What are the most common services and infrastructure that gets repatriated back to the mothership and away from the cloud?
I can go first. For me, it could be certain use cases or certain workloads. A lot of things that I see, it comes back to that application or data gravity. In some cases, there are things that can't simply move to the cloud. You may have old infrastructure on-prem that can't move. A lot of times too, where you come across, there's an old application that those people or the resources that wrote the application aren't there anymore, and they're not touching that. And so they try to move the workload away from the application back in, but it causes a bad user experience. So they got to move it back while they can move other workloads. And in the meantime, they're looking at a new way to update that application or write a new app for that workload. The other one too I've seen is not anything specific, but I mentioned is just they've taken too long. They've had a certain time frame to get there. They've gone past that time frame. They've gone past that budget. So they start pulling back on prem and looking at a different plan to get there. So that's just more from an EUC perspective because that's what I deal with mostly. But that's what I've seen so far. Anyone else want to tackle that question?
Yeah, I think. Go ahead. Ben.
I would say, obviously the EUC and that really follows not necessarily based off the workload, but the applications that the users are using. Where I've seen outside of that, probably the most is around like SQL and database services, where they want to leverage that PaaS because either they don't have the database expertise in-house, as they may have retired, and hiring DBAs can be expensive. But those applications aren't able to leverage them properly. So they make, a plan of, I'm going to put all of this out into the cloud and I'm going to use SQL PaaS or whatnot. And then they get 3/4 of the way there and they're like, well, PaaS doesn't really support that piece of it. And now they got to back all that stuff out and then, start over. So, and that, that's just, really coming from the experience that I had, but SQL seems to be the one, and it's all around. They want to leverage that SQL PaaS, but they're so used to having full control top to bottom that they didn't plan out everything that they needed. And now they got to come back to keep the application up and going and then figure out what plan B is going to look like.
I was actually going to say that same thing because we've seen that quite a bit where something with the expectations and the calculations and forecasting were made for something to be performant at cloud scale, but for whatever reason, whether control, compliance, or just performance, it's not. And so that, we've seen all sorts of, especially, like you mentioned, Benjamin, things that are you wanted to take advantage of that SQL platform as a service, just couldn't make it work, right? And then it kind of goes again to what Jarian mentioned. There's only going to be, this doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing, right? If things are going over budget, if things are getting too complex, things don't know how to evolve in the cloud. There's no maturity. If you can't get to that level in the cloud maturity model, of where the application it needs to be or is expected to be by a certain time, that's when we start to see things coming back. And a lot of times, for us, we do see that is for security and compliance reasons as well, right? So, we've seen a couple of times now, even more recently, things come back because they need to be, and it may not be permanent, but they need to be pushed into a sovereign cloud type environment, right? So they need to come back and be rethought in how that gets deployed. They have to go back and kind of reevaluate how do they do a sovereign, public cloud, hyperscaler type environment or hybrid cloud, and wrap the compliance around that.
Yeah. Also, too, if any other questions out there from the attendees, keep them coming either in the chat or use the Q&A. Because right now we're in open panel discussion. So anything you guys want to ask, whether it's our experience or we come across, feel free to ask. Anything from you, Patrick?
All I'm thinking about is Taco Tuesday. Is pretty much on my brain. So,
Nice.
no, it seems like the appropriate day for that.
So I got one for the panel here. So what have you guys seen as some of your best successes for deployments in the cloud?
I think M&A probably is some of the it seems to be that a lot of organizations have the governance sort of built into that process to make it iterative. So I mean, we have seen that work, and then it's almost like it's not it's put it out there, get it integrated or get it available to both sides, and then figure out where it needs to be. So kind of the chaos of M&A, I guess, lends itself well sometimes to hey, a lot of these things can stay out here. They're used transitive, or they've got a shelf life, and after X date, it's not going to be needed anymore. So we can keep it here, and then we can sunset it after that. It's a great use case for that. And then I think again, we've seen with kind of those transitive use cases like development, test dev sort of stuff, those transitive environments that are, let's build this, let's go test it, see if it works, and then, bring it back in-house to replicate for production.
Yeah, where I've seen the most success is where the organization is willing to change their operational model to fit it. So, thinking around automation and how do we make the system do the work for us rather than us trying to do all of this work. And like the first time around, we may have to, do a little bit of R&D, but like, all right, we did it one time. How do we script this? How do we automate this? How do we make it so that next time this happens, it's completely hands off and our only interaction is essentially getting that notification that says, yep, the work was done. The things are there for you now. When you get that organizational push and buy-in to, all right, you did it once, and now how is it going to go forward? Then it gives you that flexibility too, to where, hey, if Azure's not working for me now, I want to bring it back on prem. Well, I've got the process down. I just need to figure out and change the pointers so that now instead of going over here to Azure, you do that exact same process, but do it on my AHV cluster on prem. But you're not rethinking, the core processes around it and the operations around it. You're just figuring out where's this going to land today.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that, Benjamin, as well. I see a lot of that in the role I have at Nutanix and so forth. But the use case wise, I've seen the biggest success one is disaster recovery as another one. Mark did mention the bursting or temporary, which is a great one. Disaster recovery is another one because they can slowly start building that up while they're turning down their existing disaster recovery locations and do testing in there, and then be able to be very agile and very elastic with their disaster recovery. So as far as a use case, disaster recovery has been a pretty good, successful one that I've worked with customers with as they're trying to get out of those disaster recovery locations for their secondary data centers. Patrick?
Yeah, I think the most successful has been when you have a clear goal and VDI things, as in all I need is a little virtual desktop that just does this and this, and especially when it's non-persistent, and especially when they don't need anything other than, like, in some cases, not even Microsoft Office, where it is just straight bare bones. I need to get them in, and I've seen that obviously in the M&A side used. But when you have, I think the people that have had the clearest plan and the simplest plan, or have planned the most, are the ones that becomes whatever the most successful thing is. Because I've seen databases go up into the cloud and be successful, but I've seen a lot of them make the U-turn in the cul-de-sac and head right back, right? So I think planning is there, and that really drives that kind of success there. So it looks like we got another there talking about there. Let's see. I've seen if anybody else, because I mean, I think the next thing for me is let's talk about in the sense of this, in the cloudy.com here, is what is, so we've talked about successes, we've talked about some failures, and we've talked about considerations as kind of our big three things. But what is, from each of you, the most surprising thing you've learned about just moving anybody or anything to the cloud that really kind of caught you off guard that you didn't see a blog about or a tweet about that you had to learn trial by fire? Is there anything that stands out to anybody? I know for me on the security side was that every cloud is so different. There's almost no similarities between them when it comes to security nerd stuff and when it comes to auditing and privileged account management and all that, that you have to learn each one of those. And the hardest part is auditing it and then visualizing it, because there's not a pretty GUI in some cases, the way these groups are and everything like that. So that was the thing that hit me the hardest personally, and professionally. I had a lot of clients was like learning how to secure it, and especially when there's not a lot of documentation about how to secure each one. All of them are just a little too fluffy and not enough step by step.
It's hard to be prescriptive, I mean, and especially when, like you said, from the security perspective, they're all different, but from an operational perspective also, that's where we've seen it too, where you try to put it in multiple, clouds or even hybrid, and the operational aspects change or different enough that, you're going back and changing run books, you're going back and break fixing on the fly, all that kind of fun stuff. It's definitely can make it unpredictable.
Yeah, I'll kind of I don't want to sound like a commercial here, but some of the cookie cutter stuff and the operational stuff I don't really see in my role, because of our offering that is a multi-hybrid cloud solution, because you're getting the same, once you're past the networking and security, everything else is just our same interface, whether it's Azure or AWS. So, and where we're going in the future, so that makes things easier, and it makes my job a lot easier. Because I know before I got into Nutanix and started doing this stuff, just trying to native cloud, you guys are absolutely spot on, is the operational aspect and the different interfaces. But yeah, being able to do what I've been working with in the past few years, I think that's made things a lot easier.
I think the thing that I've found and continue to find is that cloud providers are still figuring out what their offering is and what that's going to look like. So you may not have been able to do something 3 months ago that now is completely open to you, or you may have been doing something for 3 months and in a kind of traditional on-prem, you deploy it, you let it ride, and all is well and good, and nothing really changes from that perspective. Now you have to go back, and when you have to redeploy that or update the deployment, it may be completely different than when you did it 3 months ago, because the services have changed, the offerings have changed from the provider. So that, it goes back to governance and making sure we know what we have out there, how we're leveraging it, what all's talking to it, and making sure that we're staying up to date on that, and making sure that all those pieces of the puzzle are still fitting together the way that they're supposed to.
Right. And I think to your point there too, is with that constant change, there's not a lot of cheerleading that happens or news that says something's going and something's coming away. And I think one key to that is also the types of instances on every cloud, and the price per month and the right size. And you might need to swap to a V3 from a V4, or a V4 to this D2 from a B, right? Like everybody has these like top secret cheat codes here that you have to figure out per cloud, of what's the best for what you're doing. And I like James's comment here that literally everything in the cloud costs money, from the IP address to the snapshot to the resource to the doohickey to the thingamabob to analytics to the log. Everything does. The data in the cloud, the data that comes out of the cloud, everything is like that. And I know another one that caught me is talking about limits and subscription quotas, and like, oh, you can only bring 12, and then you build 12, and it's like, oh, then you got to request this. And some of those things are completely automated, and some of them like actually take hours. So you may be like, oh, I'm going to build 14 things. No, you're not. You're going to build 10, and you're going to be stuck on the other 4 for 2 hours while you wait for this case to go through the thing. So that's a good one.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. It's like the one nice thing that cloud has, it's kind of choose your own adventure, right? You get to pick your path, you get to pick what kind of a la carte tools you want to use, but in the end, you're going to pay for that. And the nice thing is, it's not you have to take everything. You can just take a bite of some things and not have the whole meal. So even though there's cost with everything, there is some benefits that you get to use exactly what you want to use in the cloud without having to pay for more than you're going to consume. And then Tarkin had a good point here in the chat too, as well, that cloud comes with costs. Business has to weigh what they want it to be used for and what business outcomes they will address. Some take the additional cost to opt into agility, BCDR, security, or better reach outside of the on-premises perimeters just to stay competitive. And that's a great point as well. So, there's business things to this. There's other things they can do, looking at what to be competitive, or just to get ahead of competitors even also. So
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to look through all these things.
there's a question from Chris Murray here.
Yep, got one. Yep.
Yeah, do most cloud initiatives exceed initial budget expectations?
I've never seen one that was spot on. I don't know about y'all, because I think that it's to James's point, is that since everything costs something, everyone just goes like, that's just the cost of the VM that's in the little wizard as I'm hitting next. But in reality, there's about 10 other line items that might be there. Now, they may only add up to a couple dollars, but then if you're doing things at scale, I've never seen one perfect. And even when you use like each cloud's cost calculator, I've never seen one. I said I want to run 3 VMs for a month, and it actually come to that amount. It's always been more.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is as you start going down, then the businesses initially, as you're mid deployment, they're like, well, we want to add this piece onto it too. And we want to add it on this piece. I mean, it's no different than, when you would do a traditional on-prem deployment is, hey, I sized it for, this is what the deployment was supposed to service. And then I'm going to have my X% of growth per year. Well, hey, we came in with twice that amount of growth in the first year. What do we do? With cloud, it's a little bit easier because you use the purchasing power of some of the hosting providers, and you can meet that. But then you come back, and then the project manager's like, "Why are you over budget?" And I'm like, well, the requirements changed mid project, and we had 4 different things that weren't accounted for initially, so we went over budget.
Yep. Yeah, I think all those things ring true from what I've seen as well. And it all starts with planning, but even with the great plan, requirements can change. Like Benjamin was saying, you might get 6 months into it where everything's good, and then all of a sudden comes a new use case that wasn't planned for, or something changed in the initial requirements, and that's going to change your budget, and that's where things can possibly run over. So, or an acquisition happens, or you name it, could happen to change those things to make sure that that budget's going to change and so forth. So yeah, I don't think I've seen it stay under or even on.
All right, I'm thinking it looks like we're almost good. I know the one thing I'm sitting here thinking is, I mean, we're getting ready to close this down, and here it is. We're coming into the summer. Does we'll just ask a regular human question and not nerdy. Is anyone got any fun summer plans? Anyone doing that? Because it's about to get hot over here. Or warmer, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, it's hot here in Georgia, so try to stay cool. Head to the pool as much as possible.
Yep, hydrate each way, right?
That's right.
Main thing is trying to keep the kids busy while school's out, and trying to balance the job as well. That's always the fun part.
Yep, that's a never-ending gymnastics and jump rope that has to be done. All right, cool. Well, and then as you can see, as we're coming up here in just a couple weeks, right? I don't know about y'all, but my kids will be out of school that week when this webinar happens. So it'll an Elevate one. So this means we're going to get to hear from James on some awesome Dexy things and thanks to Liquidware for sponsoring that and getting that all going. So there's going to be lots of fun stuff there, and talking about how Liquidware can help make things more better, so that you can give the visibility to deliver, manage, and monitor and control that experience of that user. And so we're going to see that coming up. And then I think we got one more slide, and that's there. Oh, I see Jen. She's back there. She is like the ninja of the whole thing. So it looks like we might have a winner. And for the prize of the World of EUC swag, it looks like we've got the winner, and it is, survey says, James Ma. Congratulations, sir. and we'll reach out to you and get your shipping info. So you'll hear from Jen on that, and that'll get that. So congratulations. And then I think we have that one. And if any other questions, just reach out to us. I know, yep, I know I'm jelly of it now because I don't even have some of that stuff. So if you have any other suggestions or questions, please reach out to the World of EUC. This goes to the whole herd of nerds up there. And again, thank you, Benjamin and Mark, for joining us today, and Jarian as always, and everybody that joined here. And thanks to our partners and sponsors to make this happen. And one thing that I can tell you is if you've signed up to be a leader, you're going to hear a lot of stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks to get some of these groups going locally. So keep your ear to your email because nerdy things are heading your way. Anybody else got any closing things?
Nope. Just, make sure, to help spread the word too as well. So as we do more webinars and things, please share and repost on your social media tools. And if you aren't in the Slack as well, because most everyone on this webinar should be on the site already, but if you're not in the Slack, come join the Slack as well, where we have many channels for our different, not only our sponsors, but just technologies out there. And we all can get in there and help each other out and just have more conversations. So thank you for joining as well. And thank you to our sponsors also.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that point there too is if you're a member on the Slack side, but not the website side, then you're missing over half the party. So you want to be a member of both. That is where you can make all the connections and have all the nerdy fun. And thank you all for coming, and y'all shake and bake and have a great rest of your week here.
Take care, everybody.
Later,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Benjamin.